Krista watched the sun's last sliver fade as it gave way to darkness. The sidewalk crowds thinned as she headed north on a stretch of Madison Avenue. Rumbles of thunder threatened in the distance. Cool, moist air chased most of the evening joggers into their homes. A fine mist hung in the air. It collected on her nylon jacket, streamed down, and dripped off her sleeves. Krista pulled her jacket tighter and stuffed her hands in her pockets. It was everything she could do to ward off the sudden chill in the air. She walked without purpose, eyes cast downward as she followed the cracks in the cement. She shivered when she tucked a dark piece of wet brown hair behind her ear. The temperature must have dropped 15 degrees in the last hour, but it was the farthest thing from her mind. Born and raised in New York City, Krista was certainly no stranger to cold weather. The streets stayed awake with buzzing traffic. A few other people walked the sidewalks. They might be friends who wanted to go out for drinks or tourists looking for a good time. She passed a couple of people in suits, professionals who had left a late-night meeting. She saw people who waited in front of bars, prostitutes who stopped to bargain with possible clients, and the homeless huddled in groups. It was a city full of people with plans. Everyone except Krista. She didn't want to be out here, but she didn't want to be at home either. Every night seemed to replay itself, and it always ended in a fight with her mother. Krista wanted the investigation to be over, but her mother insisted that she relax, wait it out, and let the police find Christian through a traditional investigation. Krista's patience was already fed up with the traditional investigation. She wasn't safe. Christian wouldn't leave and let her move on with her life. She wouldn't be safe until her husband was locked behind bars. Until she saw him dragged away by the bailiff, Krista felt the weight of his presence. Christian was in this city, hiding, waiting, like a snake ready to strike. Why did everyone expect her to sit and wait for the attack? "Ma'am, do you need a ride?" came a husky, accented voice. Krista jumped. She glanced sideways at the cabbie. The yellow monstrosity had pulled as close to the curb as possible and rolled next to her to match her pace. Another cab. She'd lost count of how many times she'd been asked. She was cold and wet, and water had thoroughly soaked her shoes. Still, Krista wasn't ready to go home. "No thanks." "You sure?" he tried again. "It's kinda cold out here." "Yes," she moved away. "I'm fine. I don't need a ride." He shrugged. "Suit yourself." He looked at the dark street. "Where you headin'? There's construction up ahead." Krista followed his gaze. He was right. Barricades blocked the road. The streetlights were off. It left the area shrouded in an ominous aura of darkness. She slowed her steps. Where was she going? There was nothing out here that could solve her problems. Krista stopped and turned back to the street. Her eyes searched the empty curb. Behind her, brake lights lit the misty air. Krista turned and faced the darkness. A line of orange and white barricades ran across the road like a group of kids holding hands as they crossed the street. Hanging above the barricades was the 59th Street traffic signal. It cycled through its routine, even though the road construction eliminated the traffic. Krista didn't see any construction workers. It was probably too wet to work tonight. Orange diamond-shaped signs lined the sidewalk. Men working, road closed, and the obvious road construction ahead. Krista walked to the traffic cones that were lined up to block off an open manhole. She glanced over her shoulder. The cab had disappeared, probably off to hound a different pedestrian roaming the sidewalk after dark. She wished she knew what time it was. It felt like hours since she had left the house. She sighed and walked past the traffic cones and multiple construction signs. She had already ignored the cabbie's attempts to change her direction. Why shouldn't she continue? Her steps were tentative and rebellious as Krista made her way closer to the orange and white barricades lining the intersection. Thunder growled. She raised her eyes. It was the second or third warning of an approaching storm. The mist thickened, and a few small droplets of falling water hit the cement. The rain started with a slow drizzle. It cut through the fine mist like spears attacking the sidewalk. She flinched as a drop landed on her cheek, then another on her shoulder. "Great," Krista muttered. She already regretted her decision to decline the cabbie's offer. With an agitated huff, she turned her back on the construction and headed home. Krista barely made it to the intersection when a crowd of heavy footsteps stopped her. Panic settled in the pit of her stomach. The cab driver had stopped and talked to her. A while ago, she had passed an elderly woman who sat on a door stoop and waited for her son. None of that scared her. But this was different. This felt different. Most people who walked the streets lived ordinary lives, but there were always miscreants looking for trouble. Her heart raced as the steps grew louder. They gradually stomped out the soft pitter-patter of the rain. The light mist gradually dissipated as drops became more common. It quickly drenched her hair and clothes as they pounded the sidewalk. Voices hit her through the rain. She backed up, put her back flat against the cold, wet brick building, and held her breath. "Man, James, you said it wasn't supposed to rain." "Hey, I only told you what Tim said." "What have you got to worry about?" Another voice added. "Shit floats." "At least this might cover our tracks. No one's going to want to follow us in this." Cover our tracks? Krista tried to disappear into the shadows. She didn't want anything to do with anyone covering their tracks. She stilled as they came into view. 4 of them. 2 walked in front, 2 in back. "Yeah, I guess you got a point." Krista tried to memorize their appearances in case she had to pick someone out of a lineup or give a description to the police. She almost smiled at the thought. The police wouldn't be much help if her father's investigation was any indication of their best effort. These boys all looked young, late teens if she had to guess. 3 of them were fairly thin and roughly the same height. The one in the back was shorter and husky. One of them was black, the rest were white, and they all wore dark-colored clothing, right down to their gloves. The heavy-set boy trailed a step behind the rest, as if he didn't belong with the group. He walked slower and kept his head down. Krista kept her eyes on them as they walked past her. The boys laughed and joked in the rain, without a care in the world. Krista didn't dare move until the last one crossed the intersection. After a moment, she felt confident she had eluded them. She kept her focus on the corner as she took a careful step out of her hiding place. The tip of her tennis shoe nicked the rim of a glass Budweiser long-neck bottle. The attack forced it to roll in a small semicircle. Krista threw her gaze at the bottle and glared at the sudden scraping noise. The pounding rain seemed to silence at the exact moment she realized the laughing stopped. Slowly, she raised her eyes back to the corner, not the least bit surprised to find the husky straggler of the group staring back. The young man pointed at Krista. "James, do you think she's a witness?" "No," Krista said quickly. "I don't know what you're talking about." James backtracked, stood beside the straggler, and narrowed his eyes. "That's exactly what a witness would say." "Also, someone who didn't witness anything," Krista clarified. The other 2 came around the corner. Now they were all interested in what the 4th member had found. Krista took a step back. She kicked the same damn beer bottle with the back of her heel. James stepped closer, his face illuminated under the streetlight's eerie glow. He looked menacing, a young man in search of trouble. The rain soaked his hair. It clung to his forehead in thick, dark clumps. His eyes were focused, his mouth twisted into a curious sort of smile. Krista took another step back. "Who are you?" James asked. "What are you doing back there?" She shrugged. "Nothing, just walking." "Here?" he asked. "At this time of night?" Krista pushed her wet hair back with her fingers. "Sure, it's a nice night for a stroll." James exchanged a look with the straggler. He jerked his head toward Krista. "Come on, let's get her."